An elderly man, beaten and humiliated. A bully who thought no one would dare to step in. But he didn't know a former SWAT operator who had seen enough darkness to recognize evil instantly. With a loyal K9 at his side, he stood up, not for glory, not for revenge, but because some lines should never be crossed. Stay with this story. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe for more. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. A frigid wind sliced through Snowcreek's narrow streets, carrying fine needles of ice that shimmered like crushed glass in the pale morning light. Inside the mountaintop diner, warmth clung to the air, but it could not soften the tension that had been building beneath the town's frozen surface for years. The old wooden booths creaked softly as a handful of locals, mostly laborers worn down by life in winter, kept their heads down, sipping coffee without speaking. They all knew the unspoken rule: avoid the Hayes family at any cost. At a corner table sat Walter Graham, an 82-year-old retired forest ranger whose frame had grown thin with age, though his back remained stubbornly straight. His face was deeply lined, carved by decades of snowstorms and mountain winds, and his long white eyebrows gave him a dignified, almost ancient presence. His hands, marked with old scars from a lifetime of working the woods, curled around a steaming mug. Despite his frailty, his eyes, pale blue and still sharp, held a quiet resilience. But even the strongest eyes dimmed under fear, and Walter had lived in fear for months. Today, fear finally caught up. The diner's bell jingled sharply, and conversation cut off as Tucker Hayes swaggered in. Tucker was in his late 20s, broad-shouldered in a way that came less from hard labor and more from an overfed arrogance. He wore a thick brown work jacket stained with motor oil, and his unruly blonde hair shot in greasy spikes from beneath a beanie. His jaw was square, but softened by a perpetual pout of entitlement, and his eyes, cold gray, flicked across the diner with casual cruelty. Tucker had grown up believing consequences were for other people. His temper was infamous, a direct byproduct of the man who stepped in behind him. Charles Hayes, his father. Charles was in his late 50s, tall with a heavy commanding build softened by wealth rather than work. His hair, once a proud chestnut, had thinned toward the crown, and his beard, thick, neatly trimmed and streaked with iron gray, gave him an appearance of false respectability. His sharply tailored wool coat contrasted violently with the rustic diner, and the leather gloves he removed one finger at a time suggested a man who despised being anywhere outside his controlled domain. Charles had eyes of polished obsidian, hard, reflective, never revealing more than he intended. Those eyes swept the diner, and every customer immediately lowered their gaze. Walter did not. It was not bravery so much as stubborn habit. He had looked storms in the eye for 80 years and never flinched. Tucker's grin widened when he noticed. "Well, if it ain't old man Graham," Tucker drawled, loud enough for every soul inside to hear. "You still pretending that scrap of forest is yours?" Walter lifted his chin. "It is mine, and your father knows it." His voice trembled, not from age but anger. Charles stepped forward, removing his gloves with the precision of a surgeon. "Walter," he said calmly, "we've given you every chance to accept a generous offer. But time is no longer a luxury we have." His smooth tone only made the threat more chilling. The locals stared into their drinks, frozen by the same fear that had ruled Snowcreek ever since the Hayes family entangled itself with corrupt officials. Walter shook his head. "I won't sell. Not now, not ever." Tucker scoffed. "Then maybe we teach you to listen." Before Walter could react, Tucker seized the front of the old man's flannel coat and yanked him from his seat. Walter stumbled, his cane clattering across the floor. Gasps erupted, but no one moved. Tucker's fist cracked across Walter's cheek, sending him sprawling onto the cold tile. Pain shot through the old man's ribs as he struggled to breathe. Outside, a faint whir of electronics captured everything. Evan Birch, a 23-year-old travel vlogger with shaggy brown hair and a baby-faced earnestness, had set up his camera to film the snow-covered townscape for his channel. Evan was slender, almost delicate in build, with long fingers always fidgeting nervously with camera buttons. He wore a puffy navy jacket and a knitted scarf his sister had made, and though he rarely got into conflict, he had a moral compass as bright as the LED on his camera. When he glanced through the diner's large window and saw Walter fall, his face blanched. "Oh my God," he whispered, adjusting the zoom with shaking hands. His heart pounded, fear wrestling with instinct, but he did not stop recording. Inside, Tucker raised his fist again. Walter's vision blurred, a metallic taste filling his mouth. He could feel the room's silence like a suffocating blanket. The doorbell chimed once more. This time, the atmosphere shifted. Mark Holden, 58, stepped into the diner with a slow, deliberate gait. Snow clung to the shoulders of his thick charcoal gray tactical jacket, and a faint frost crusted the edges of his short brown beard. His face was rugged, angular, marked with faint scars along the jawline and one thin line cutting above his eyebrow, remnants of a career spent confronting danger head-on. His hair, once dark, now carried streaks of iron gray, cropped short in a military style. Mark had the build of a man who had forced his body to obey even after age tried to protest. Broad shoulders, powerful arms, and a posture too disciplined to ever fully relax. His eyes were a deep, steady green, the eyes of someone who had stared into chaos and learned to control his pulse. Those eyes scanned the scene in less than a second. The trembling elderly man on the floor, Tucker looming over him, the terrified witnesses, the faint tremor in Walter's hand as he tried to rise, the smell of fear and spilled coffee. And then, as naturally as breath, Mark moved. At his side padded Ranger, a 7-year-old German Shepherd, muscular and imposing, his black and tan coat shimmering under the diner lights. A faded scar crossed his left shoulder, proof of a mission long past where he'd saved Mark's life. Ranger's ears stood sharp, his amber eyes alert, intelligent, almost reading Mark's heartbeat. He walked with a soldier's precision, tail low, muscles coiled beneath his winter-thick fur. Every patron felt the shift in the air the moment Ranger entered. Something unspoken, instinctive, ancient, a guardian had arrived. Mark's voice came out calm but edged in steel. "Step away from him!" Tucker spun around, momentarily thrown off by the presence of a man who did not look away. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. Mark didn't answer. He simply lowered one hand. Ranger stepped forward, placing himself between Tucker and Walter with the silent authority of a seasoned warrior. A low rumble rose from Ranger's chest, not aggression, but a warning. Controlled, professional, deadly. Tucker faltered. It was the first time anyone in Snowcreek had seen him hesitate. Charles Hayes stiffened, recognizing something in Mark's posture. Training. Lethal training. "This doesn't concern you," Charles said sharply. "Walk away." Mark's gaze didn't waver. "It concerns me the moment a man twice your son's age ends up on the floor." Walter struggled to sit up, clutching his ribs. "Mark," he rasped, "please, don't get involved." But Mark was already involved. He crouched and gently placed a steadying hand on Walter's shoulder, his expression softening. "You're safe," he murmured. "Ranger's here." Ranger's eyes never left Tucker. Outside, Evan Birch swallowed hard, pointing the lens directly at the trio. He felt guilt twist inside him, fear urging him to run, conscience urging him to stay. His breath fogged the camera screen as he whispered, "Please, someone stop them." Inside, Tucker stepped back, emboldened only by his father's presence. "You think a dog scares me?" Ranger's growl deepened, not louder, but colder. Tucker froze again. Charles clenched his jaw. The plan had been so simple. Intimidate the old man, get the signature, clean their hands. But this stranger, this disciplined, unreadable man with the K9, had shattered that script. Mark rose slowly, his height and calm command filling the room. "Touch him again," he said quietly, "and you'll find out exactly what scares you." Silence swallowed the diner. Snow hissed against the windows like a warning. Tucker's throat bobbed as he swallowed. For the first time, he wasn't sure he held all the power. And in that suspended breath between violence and restraint, Snowcreek felt something it had forgotten. Hope. The diner seemed to hold its breath as Ranger braced his solid frame before Walter, the German Shepherd's muscles poised beneath his thick winter coat. His breath fogged the frigid air in steady bursts, each exhale a silent threat more effective than any weapon Mark had ever carried. The growl vibrating through Ranger's chest was controlled, measured, the same sound Mark had heard in distant deserts and abandoned buildings when danger lurked just beyond sight. Tucker Hayes remained frozen mid-step, his bravado evaporating like steam from spilled coffee. His gray eyes flicked between Ranger's sharp amber stare and Mark's unmoving posture as he struggled to reclaim the swagger that had deserted him. His hands, reddened from cold and violence, curled into fists before loosening again when Ranger shifted forward by an inch. It was enough to tilt the balance of fear. Walter leaned into Mark's steadying grip, his breath shallow but determined. Pain radiated along the old man's ribs, but it was humiliation that burned sharper. He had spent a lifetime facing storms that would break other men. Now he had been felled by a bully in front of an entire town. Mark's jaw tightened. He felt a familiar flicker inside his chest, the old instinct, the part of him trained to neutralize threats, to shield the vulnerable, to ignore fear. Ranger sensed the shift in him and remained locked in place, awaiting another command. The diner's door swung open a second time, letting in a gust of icy wind, and a man with a badge polished enough to reflect the overhead lights. Sheriff Owen Mallory, a broad-shouldered officer in his early 50s, stepped into the diner with an air of forced authority. Mallory had thinning sandy blonde hair slicked back with too much pomade, and a thick mustache that did little to soften the hard planes of his face. Lines etched around his eyes spoke of years spent navigating political pressure rather than actual police work. He wore his olive-brown uniform snugly, the collar stiff and immaculate, but the slight paunch beneath his belt hinted at comfort over duty. Sheriff Mallory surveyed the scene with a calculated squint, the kind of look that measured potential consequences, not justice. His gaze lingered on Tucker, then flicked to Charles Hayes, who stood stiffly near the broken booth. Only then did Mallory move forward. "What's going on here?" he drawled, his voice too casual for the severity of the moment. Tucker straightened, relief flooding into his features. "Sheriff," he said quickly, pointing at Walter, "this old man slipped and fell. My dad and I were just helping him up." The lie was so poorly delivered, even Tucker's own father winced. Sheriff Mallory's gaze skimmed over Walter's bruised cheek and the overturned chair, but he made no move to question the obvious. Instead, he turned to Mark, eyes narrowing with scrutiny. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and call off your dog." Mark didn't move. His voice remained low but carried a weight that silenced the nearby tables. "My dog stays where he is until that young man is no longer standing over an injured senior." Mallory's lips thinned. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in public, especially not by an outsider. Charles Hayes seized the opening, placing a hand on his son's shoulder with theatrical calm. "Sheriff, perhaps you can help de-escalate this misunderstanding. My boy was only assisting Mr. Graham." Mallory nodded as if Charles had spoken truth carved in stone. It was clear the sheriff knew exactly which side of Snowcreek's power structure buttered his bread. "Right," Mallory said. "A misunderstanding." He bent to retrieve Walter's cane, holding it out with what he must have believed passed as respect. His tone carried an edge of dismissal. "Let's not make a scene." Walter tried to speak, but pain tightened his throat. Mark stepped forward just enough to draw Mallory's focus. "A man was assaulted," Mark said evenly. "There's nothing misunderstood about a bruised face and a broken chair." Tucker bristled. "Why don't you mind your own?" But Ranger cut him off with a sudden snap of his head, eyes blazing with controlled fury. Tucker stumbled back, colliding with a table behind him. Mark didn't need to repeat the command. Ranger stood firm, steady, unshakable. Sheriff Mallory tugged at his belt, irritation flaring. "Sir, lower your dog or You'll what?" Mark asked quietly. There was no threat in the words, only a calm challenge that made Mallory hesitate. The sheriff looked into Mark's eyes and recognized, perhaps for the first time in years, a man who could not be intimidated or bribed into submission. "Sheriff," Walter murmured, lifting trembling fingers toward him. "They're trying to take my land. They've been threatening me for weeks." Mallory straightened too sharply. "Mr. Graham, please, let's not entertain baseless accusations." "Accusations?" Walter rasped. "It's the truth." Charles's expression hardened, though he maintained a veneer of courtesy. "Sheriff, my son and I have had no part in whatever Mr. Graham is implying." Mark studied Charles with a soldier's intuition. Beneath the smooth voice and expensive coat was a man cracking under pressure, hiding desperation behind polished manners. Mark had seen that look before, in corrupt contractors overseas, men who smiled as they slipped knives behind backs. A truth settled into Mark's gut like cold iron. Snowcreek was infested with rot dressed as authority. Walter's fingers curled around Mark's sleeve. His voice dropped into a whisper meant only for him. They want my land. It's the last piece they need for that Snow Ridge luxury expansion. Mark, they won't stop. Mark felt a slow burn rise beneath his ribs. He turned to face the sheriff fully. If you're not going to take a statement, he said, then I'll escort Mr. Graham to a doctor myself. Mallory's jaw clenched. For a moment, the sheriff looked ready to assert his authority, but the weight of Mark's unblinking stare, combined with Ranger's silent vigilance, made him back down half an inch. Fine, Mallory muttered. Get him looked at. But don't stir up trouble. We don't need outsiders causing issues in a peaceful town. Mark exhaled once through his nose. This town doesn't look peaceful to me. With slow, measured movements, he helped Walter to his feet. Ranger pressed against the old man's side, offering warmth and stability, his instincts sensing frailty and fear. Tucker made a final attempt to redeem his pride. You can't protect him forever, he spat. Snowcreek takes care of its own. Mark cast a final look over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. Exactly, he said, and that's why you should be worried. Outside, snow battered the windows in thick, slanted sheets. Evan Birch, still gripping his camera, stumbled backward when the trio exited the diner. His breath puffed out, white and frantic, as he scrambled to hide his trembling hands. Mark's gaze flicked to him briefly, noting the camera, noting the fear, and the courage trying to pierce through it. But Mark said nothing. Not yet. Walter winced as the wind cut through his coat. Ranger brushed against him protectively, and for the first time since the attack, the old man's eyes softened, not with relief, but with gratitude. Mark tightened his grip beneath Walter's elbow. Let's get you out of the cold, he said. Behind them, the diner door swung shut with a hollow clang, sealing Tucker, Charles, and the sheriff inside, a den of alliances that Mark now knew ran deeper than a simple assault. Snow whipped violently down the street as the three of them headed out, Ranger leading through the storm like a sentinel. Somewhere in that blinding whiteness, answers waited. But so did danger. The storm thickened as Mark guided Walter through the winding forest trail toward his cabin, the snow swallowing sound until the world felt suspended in white silence. Ranger trotted ahead with disciplined purpose, his paws sinking into powdery drifts that reached halfway up his legs. The dog's black and tan coat bristled with vigilance, and every so often he halted, nose lifting into the frozen air as if tasting danger before it arrived. Mark kept a firm grip under Walter's elbow, supporting the old man's trembling steps. Walter's breath rattled as he fought the cold seizing his lungs, his lined face growing paler with each gust slicing through the trees. Yet beneath the exhaustion, the old ranger's eyes flashed with stubborn fire. He had survived winters harsher than this, but the threat chasing him now was not snow or wind, but men. They reached the cabin, a sturdy wooden structure built against a slope of granite and spruce. Its roof sagged under layers of snow, and icicles glimmered like small daggers beneath the gutter. Mark had chosen this remote place years ago for its silence and for its distance from the noise of a world he no longer trusted. Tonight, that remoteness became an advantage. He eased Walter into a worn leather armchair beside the wood stove, then draped a thick wool blanket over his lap. The fire had burned low, sending embers pulsing like faint red stars, but warmth slowly crept back into the room. Walter closed his eyes with relief. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean for you to get dragged into this." Mark shook his head. "I wasn't dragged. I walked in." Walter looked at him, the flicker of the fire reflecting off his pale blue eyes. "And you didn't walk back out," he said, voice thick with gratitude and fear. Mark didn't respond. He turned instead to the closet by the door, pulling out a rugged olive-green duffel bag, one he hadn't opened since his last year with the SWAT counter-assault unit. His hands moved with automatic precision, revealing compact motion sensors, thermal pucks, a portable signal jammer, and a foldable surveillance drone with a carbon shell. These weren't weapons, not exactly, but tools forged for conflict, tools he hoped he would never need again. Ranger approached, tail low, ears pricked. He watched Mark silently, his amber eyes filled with instinctive readiness. Mark reached down and rested a hand on the dog's head. "It's starting again, buddy," he whispered. Ranger leaned into his palm, understanding more than words could convey. Mark set up the first sensor on the windowsill facing the tree line, adjusting its angle to detect movement within 100 meters. Another sensor he fixed under the deck steps, burying it slightly beneath fresh snow. Each device emitted a soft confirmation chirp as it activated. Walter watched from his chair, the blanket tight around his shoulders. "You really think they'll come looking tonight?" Mark paused, meeting the old man's worried gaze. "Not tonight," he said. "They'll wait. They'll think you're scared. They'll hope I'll leave." Walter exhaled shakily. "But you won't." "No." Mark's voice dropped, carrying weight and history. "I don't walk away from people who need help." The wood stove crackled, filling the silence. Walter looked down at his weathered hands, fingers that had guided lost hikers, tended forest fires, and carved decades of stories into the trees. "I've lived through avalanches, bear attacks, storms that almost killed me. But this is worse." Mark heard the tremor behind the words, not weakness, but anger, folded beneath 80 years of survival. "You've faced harder things," Mark said quietly, "but this time, you're not facing it alone." Outside, the snow fell heavier, each flake swirling like ash in a relentless white current. Ranger paced the entryway, tail stiff, ears swiveling, his body a taut wire of focus. Something in the air unsettled him. Mark went to the kitchen counter where his phone buzzed repeatedly. Notifications flashed across the screen. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Evan Birch had posted the video. The thumbnail showed Tucker's fist raised, Walter falling, and Ranger's imposing stance mid-intervention. The title burned across the screen: "Elderly Man Assaulted, Saved by Retired SWAT and His K9." Mark felt his pulse tighten. Exposure was a double-edged blade. Fame wasn't what he wanted, especially not the kind built from violence. But as he scrolled through comments, anger and outrage surged through the digital sea. People demanded justice. News outlets began picking up the story. Activist groups shared it. Support grew by the minute. Snowcreek's buried corruption was being dragged into the light. Walter leaned forward, squinting. "Is that the diner?" Mark nodded. "The video's everywhere now." Walter's breath caught. "Then they'll blame you," he whispered, "and they'll come harder." Mark pocketed the phone. "Let them come." He moved to the front window and parted the curtain. The world outside glowed faintly under moonlit snowfall. The forest beyond the clearing was a dark wall of jagged branches, silent, still, deceptive. Yet something felt wrong, a faint shift in the air, a prickle at the base of his spine. He recognized the sensation instantly. A hunter's presence, a watcher. "Ranger!" The dog padded up beside him, lowering his head as he searched the tree line. Mark retrieved the thermal monocular from a shelf. Its matte black casing felt cold as he pressed it to his eye. A wash of colors swept across the forest, reds, greens, blues, mapping the world by heat. For a moment, the screen showed only the warm shape of Ranger and the dim glow of the cabin behind him. Then, near the bottom of the slope, a faint flare of yellow, too still to be an animal. Another flare beside. It. Two bodies. Watching. Mark's jaw tightened. Whoever they were, they had parked farther down the access road than expected, hidden beyond natural cover, patient as predators waiting for weakness, but the predators had misjudged their prey. Walter shifted in his chair. "Someone's out there, aren't they?" "Yes," Mark said. "Two of them. They're not moving yet." Walter's fingers gripped the blanket. "They won't stop, Mark. That land, my land, it's the last piece they need to trap this whole town." Mark knelt beside the old man, his voice steady and unyielding. "Then we make sure they don't get it." A sharp metallic chirp echoed from the back sensor, brief but unmistakable. Ranger's ears snapped upward, movement behind the cabin. Mark stood and retrieved the drone from the duffel bag. His hands moved swiftly as he activated its systems. The device hummed quietly as its small rotors engaged. "We're not fighting them," Mark murmured. "We're staying ahead of them." He opened the back door just enough to release the drone, letting it slip silently into the night. The wind swallowed it instantly. Ranger remained at the threshold, his stance rigid, the snow settling onto his fur like ash on armor. Mark felt an old spark ignite within him, the cold, clinical concentration of a man stepping back into the shadows he once mastered. "It's starting," he whispered. Ranger growled softly, confirming what Mark already knew. The battle for Snowcreek had begun. The storm eased by nightfall, leaving behind a sky the color of bruised steel and a cold so sharp it felt carved from glass. Mark stood at the cabin window, watching flakes drift lazily from the branches outside as Ranger patrolled the porch with slow, deliberate steps. The GermanShepherd's silhouette moved like a seasoned sentinel, a dark presence etched against pale snow. Walter slept fitfully by the fire, wrapped in layers of blankets, his breathing shallow but steady. Mark had secured every sensor, checked each signal, and calibrated the drone twice. He should have felt prepared. Instead, the night pressed against him with the weight of unfinished truth. A faint chime echoed from Mark's encrypted phone, one that bypassed his usual filters. A message, unknown sender, a single line: "Meet me, alone, Snowcreek Chapel, midnight." Mark frowned. The chapel was nearly abandoned, a stone relic perched atop a ridge of skeletal pines. No one used it except for funerals and the occasional lost hiker seeking shelter. The message carried no threat, yet its timing buzzed with unease. Ranger padded inside, snow dusting his fur. He nudged Mark's hand gently, sensing tension. "I know," Mark murmured, scratching beneath the dog's ear. This could be a trap. But instinct told him it wasn't. It felt like something else, an invitation born of desperation. Walter stirred. "Mark, going somewhere?" His voice wavered with exhaustion. Mark knelt beside him. "Just checking something. Ranger will stay with you." Walter nodded slowly, trust brightening his tired eyes. "Be careful. Snowcreek has more shadows than people." Mark gave a faint, grim smile. "Shadows don't bother me." He stepped into the night. The wind had quieted, but cold seemed to rise from the ground itself, numbing the air with every breath. The path to Snowcreek Chapel twisted along a narrow ridge where drifts piled against leaning grave markers. The chapel itself loomed ahead, a small stone building with a bell tower that had lost its bell decades ago. Its windows glowed faintly with candlelight. Someone was already inside. Mark approached cautiously, boots crunching over snow crust. When he pushed open the crooked wooden door, the warm flicker of candles spilled over his boots first, then climbed to reveal a woman seated in the front pew, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Linda Hayes rose at the sound of the door, turning toward him. She was in her mid-40s, tall and slim, with an elegance that seemed out of place in Snowcreek. Her dark brown hair, streaked subtly with silver, was pulled into a low chignon that had begun to loosen, letting a few strands fall around her angular face. Her skin was fair, though stress had carved faint hollows beneath her cheekbones. Her hazel eyes, soft green flecked with gold, held a grief that no amount of money could soften. She wore a long camel-colored wool coat, belted tightly at the waist as if holding herself together physically might prevent her from falling apart emotionally. Mark recognized her immediately. Snowcreek's quiet anomaly, Charles Hayes's wife, Tucker's mother, a woman who rarely appeared in public, and when she did, she moved like a shadow beside her husband, her silence as much a part of town rumor as their influence. Mark closed the door behind him. "You sent the message?" She nodded. Her voice trembled but remained steady enough to carry weight. "Thank you for coming. I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," Mark said. "You're taking a risk meeting me." "Not as big as the one I'm taking by not meeting you," she murmured. Linda gestured toward a pew. Mark didn't sit. He wanted her to speak first. She clasped her hands until her knuckles blanched. "I know what my husband has done," she began, each word carefully chosen, as if she were peeling away years of silence. "And I know what my son has become under his influence." Shame flickered through her voice, a shadow of guilt she carried like a second skin. "Charles has been buying up Snowcreek piece by piece. You know that much already. But it's not just for a resort. It's to cover the debts." She swallowed hard. "He made deals with foreign investors, dangerous ones. If he doesn't deliver the full land package, they will come collecting. and they won't be as gentle as he pretends to be. Mark folded his arms. That explains motive. Doesn't explain why you called me. Linda reached into her coat and produced a small black USB drive, no larger than a thumb. She held it like a fragile relic she feared might shatter. Because I can't watch this anymore. This town, those people, your friend Mr. Graham, my own son. Her voice cracked. Tucker isn't evil. He's angry, lost. Charles raised him to believe cruelty is power. I can't undo that past, but maybe I can keep him from becoming something worse. She extended the USB toward Mark. He didn't take it immediately. What's on it? Everything, Linda whispered. Financial ledgers, bribes, audio recordings, plans to intimidate homeowners, orders given to men who pretend to be forest contractors but are really hired muscle. She paused, eyes filling with quiet terror. There is even a recording of Charles saying he would make an example of Walter Graham. Mark felt a slow cold settle in his chest, a different cold from the winter outside. This was the chill of truth. Why give this to me? He asked. You could go to federal authorities yourself. Linda let out a bitter laugh. And disappear? No. You've worked with them before. I can tell from the way you move, how you think. You're not someone Charles can manipulate. And you're not afraid of corrupt badges. Mark finally accepted the USB, feeling its weight, physical, symbolic, dangerous. Linda, he said quietly, once I report this, there's no going back. You know what this means for your family. Tears welled in her eyes, glistening in the candle glow. I know, she whispered, but I'm not saving Charles. I'm saving Tucker. If I don't stop his father, he will become him. Silence settled between them like falling snow. Linda stepped back, pulling her coat tighter around herself. For the first time since he entered, Mark saw her, not as the wife of a corrupt man, but as a mother fighting the only battle she could control. I wish I'd done this sooner, she said softly. I wish I'd been braver. You're brave tonight, Mark said. That counts. She managed a faint, trembling smile. Please, be careful. Charles suspects he's being watched. He already has men in the trees. Mark's expression hardened. I know. He left the chapel without another word, the cold air slapping his face as he stepped outside. The USB felt hot in his pocket despite the freezing night. Ranger met him halfway down the path, hackles raised, breath sharp in the air. Easy, Mark whispered, kneeling to scratch behind his ear. We've got what we need. Back inside the cabin, while Walter slept, Mark retrieved an old military-grade encryption tablet from his duffel bag. Its matte black casing bore faint scratches from a dozen deployments. He inserted the USB. The screen flickered to life as files unfolded like dominoes. Names, accounts, threats, dates, recordings, each one a nail in the coffin of Snowcreek's corruption. Mark encrypted the data twice, then opened a secure channel coded to a federal contact he'd trusted for years. This is Holden, he said quietly. We have a situation in Snowcreek. Outside, wind scraped against the windows like claws. Inside, Mark felt the shift, the moment before a storm breaks, the moment a war begins to turn. Dawn came quietly to Snowcreek, its pale light stretching across the mountains like a trembling breath after a long night of fear. The storm had passed, leaving the world covered in a soft blanket of white that glowed faintly under the waking sun. A deceptive peace, fragile, thin, as if the snow itself was waiting for the first footstep to break its stillness. Mark Holden stood on the cabin porch with Ranger beside him, the GermanShepherd's breath misting in small clouds. Ranger's fur, dark sable with streaks of silver, glimmered faintly under the rising light, his ears twitching at every distant sound, an engine rumble, a shifting branch, the soft settling of snow. He was older now, nearly 8, strong but seasoned, and his eyes held the deep, quiet ache of dogs who have loved fiercely and paid the price. Inside the cabin, Walter Graham sat wrapped in wool blankets, watching the porch through the window. Even at 82, with a frail frame and thinning white hair, he carried himself with a stubborn dignity, his face lined by grief, perseverance, and winters harsher than this one. Yet this morning, in his eyes flickered something unexpected, a faint spark of hope. At 6:14 a.m., the first black SUV rolled into town. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the slow, steady approach of inevitability. Two more followed, matte black and heavy-tired, the kind of vehicles that spoke authority through silence. They glided down the main road like shadows given weight, stopping before town hall and the sheriff's office with uncanny precision. Mark watched from a distance, arms crossed, Ranger standing alert beside him. He didn't go with them. His part was already done. From the lead SUV stepped Special Agent Daniel Reeves, mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, his angular features carved in stone. His medium bronze skin was framed by short black hair slashed with a silver streak, and his cold gray eyes swept the town with the weariness of a man who knew trust rarely came without cost. "Teams 1 and 2, move," he said quietly, and agents spilled out, snow-ready gear, insulated gloves, boots crunching in the frost as they split toward their targets. At the Hayes estate, Charles Hayes stepped onto his marble porch in a luxurious black robe, freezing at the sight of agents surrounding him. Tall, late 50s, silver hair slicked back, he wore the expression of a man used to bending the world to his will. But today, his sharp blue eyes dulled to panic. "Charles Hayes, you are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, racketeering, forced acquisition of private property, and multiple counts of ordering targeted violence." For the first time in years, he said nothing. His gaze drifted to a window where Linda Hayes stood watching, hands clasped tightly, her expression fragile and unreadable. At the sheriff's office, Sheriff Dalton Briggs stepped out with a steaming mug, his uniform lazily unbuttoned, beard still damp. Burly, 60-ish, and smug by habit, he froze when federal agents met him at the door. "Hold on! What's the meaning of—" He never finished. The cuffs snapped shut, shattering the illusion of his authority. Snowcreek watched as two of its most feared figures were escorted away, small at last without their shadows. The final arrest unfolded quietly. Tucker Hayes sat hunched in his truck by the lumberyard, head in his hands, his usual arrogance melted into shaking dread. At 24, tall and muscular with an uneven beard and tousled brown hair, he looked nothing like the swaggering heir he once pretended to be. When agents approached, he didn't run or resist. Tears spilled despite his attempts to hide them. I'm not like him," he whispered. "I don't want to be like him." Agent Reeves studied him with unreadable restraint. "You're still coming with us." Tucker nodded, then spotted Mark watching from a distance. Something inside him collapsed. He stumbled through the snow, choking out, "Mark, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't know it would get this far. I just wanted my dad to notice me. I just wanted—" Mark raised a quiet hand. "Wanting approval doesn't excuse hurting people." Tucker's gaze fell, shoulders shaking. "Please, tell me how to fix it." Mark's expression carried neither cruelty nor forgiveness, only the steady truth of a man who had watched others break or rise by their choices. "Only your actions prove who you are, not your words." Tucker wept openly, offering no resistance as agents led him away. By noon, Snowcreek felt lighter, as though some long-clinging frost had finally cracked. When Mark returned to the cabin, Walter insisted on standing. Leaning on his cane, he smiled with weary pride. "You didn't just save my life," he rasped. "You saved this entire town." Mark rested a hand on Ranger's head. "Not me," he murmured. "Us." Walter brushed trembling fingers over Ranger's fur. "And you too, old soldier." Snowcreek rebuilt slowly but meaningfully. Days rolled into weeks. Tucker Hayes returned, not to reclaim status but to make amends. He formed a volunteer crew dedicated to repairing every home his father had harmed. Through snow, wind, and thaw, they patched fences, mended roofs, and restored vandalized structures. He worked the hardest, his once proud posture replaced by humble resolve. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but neighbors saw something real in him, change rooted in action. And that was enough. As winter softened into early spring, Mark, Walter, and Ranger often sat on the porch together. Mark with black coffee, Walter wrapped in a knitted scarf, Ranger lying peacefully between them. One evening, under an orange sky melting the last winter's snow, Walter whispered, "Feels different now, like we made it through something bigger than winter." Mark nodded. "Snowcreek deserves a new season." Ranger lifted his head as if in agreement. For the first time in a long while, Snowcreek breathed freely. And deep within Mark Holden, a man sculpted by scars, losses, and hard-won resilience, something thawed. The snow had stopped falling, and broken people were finally learning to stand again. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. Sometimes they come quietly, through the steady courage of a wounded man, the loyalty of a dog who never stops believing, or the trembling choice of a young soul deciding to do better. And maybe, just maybe, moments like these are God's way of reminding us that light still breaks through even the darkest winters. Life isn't so different from Snowcreek. Every day we walk through storms no one else can see. Every day we fight battles in silence, but every day, too, we're given a chance, however small, to stand up, to reach out, to choose kindness, to protect someone who needs it. And in those moments, grace shows up. Hope shows up. Sometimes we become the miracle someone else has been praying for. If this story touched you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings in the comments. Tell us what part stayed with you. And join our community of people who believe in courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their loyal dogs. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who might need a little light today. Thank you for being here, and may God's quiet miracles find you wherever you are.